Well, hello, creatives, community, and kind folks. Welcome to RPG with DBJ. Of course, I am your host, DBJ, and all of you are my co hosts as we talk all things live and unscripted about tabletop RPGs. And as we talk about these tabletop role playing games, the impetus for this week, we're talking about nomadic cultures. And um, to give you an idea of where my thought process has gone, essentially, I've been talking quite a bit about. Uh, I saw the movie Nomadland, and then there were other small things that came into the my psychological sphere that made me think about nomadic cultures. And in the context of tabletop role playing games, it made me think like where could or how could we have a setting where uh, the idea of being a nomad, of traveling, of exploring, of going out into the unknown, or a cyclical travel concept where the society itself is moving and coming back home to a place they had to leave, like following a migratory path of some sort. And yesterday we talked about a number of reasons why people would be forced to move, whether it's dangerous weather or migratory beasts or animals that move into the region. Heck, it could even be a clash of the gods or a destruction of the magical weave and chaos storms and whatnot. But today, if you took a look at the thumbnail and a little bit of the background information, you talked about the Romani and nomadic cultures and kind of misconceptions about them. And today, of course, this being Trope Tuesday, yesterday was Monster Monday, today Trope Tuesday, we can now talk about reasons why we would want to move and why we would want to be nomadic, and how Dungeons and Dragons itself has tried to make an attempt to reframe and maybe even rectify their um, uh, because of their reinforcement of the stereotypes related to the Romani people. Now, I don't mean any disrespect to people who are, but the term most commonly associated with them are gypsies. And of course, this term has been layered on top of them. Many peoples that have been interacted with from around the world have had names given to them by outsiders which don't apply to them internally. And the nomadic Romani people are uh, absolutely like the epitome of that when it comes to both a nomadic culture, outsiders, and those in more settled, civilized regions having opinions about them. Now, for those who don't know, the Romani people are mentioned in, if not by name, by their culture in Ravenloft and the greater world that Ravenloft has. And like I said, WotC, Wizards of the Coast, has reframed who they are to give them a little bit more diversity, or give us a little more context of who they are, as opposed to either A, being called gypsies and being known as thieves and liars, and being deceptive, or being fortune tellers, which is far more than that, right? So going to Wikipedia, which seems to be always correct every time, but I'm going to read from it. The Romani, also known as the Roma, are a Indo-Aryan people, traditionally nomadic itinerants, living mostly in Europe as well as a diaspora populations in the Americas. The Romani are widely known in English by the acronym gypsies, which is considered by some Roma people to be a pejorative due to its connotations of illegality and irregularity. And um, let's see, I want to go to, not population, the there we go. The diaspora. The Roma people have a number of distinct populations. The largest being the Roma and the Iberian Calais or Caio, who reached Anatolia and the Balkans about the 12th century from a migration out of northwestern India, beginning around 600 years earlier. They settled in areas that are now Turkey, Greece, Serbia, Romania, um, Moldova, Bulgaria, North Macedonia, Hungary, Slovakia, Spain, by order of volume. And one of the difficult things to discover about people who are nomadic is that, well, yeah, well, it's a little bit difficult to find out who they are because, well, they're nomadic, and getting specific census data on people who are like A, constantly on the move, B, um, treated pretty horribly by settled individuals, and then having stereotypes set around them. It's pretty difficult to get a lot of information. But my cursory glance is that people think they number between 7 and 14 million uh, uh, people around the world, which is a pretty huge ass gap in numbers, and does lend itself to, like, that's a lot of people to not know a lot about, which is pretty amazing, I think, in many ways. Um, Actually, pretty remarkable and whatnot. Thank you very there, Tesla. We love ourselves on this Trope Tuesday to talk about tropes, archetypes, stereotypes, and things of that nature. And under TV tropes, what do we have here for the Romani? Romani have been a popular subject in media due to the many colorful stereotypes associated with the culture. In many media portrayals, they are referred to by the more commonly known name as gypsies, but it is important to note that to many Romani, that word is a racist term, sometimes considered analogous to the N word. Yes, very much so. So of course, I am saying it as a I'm not. I don't have an opinion about it, but I don't mean any disrespect. But it is the best way to make a reference in terms of the connotations about it. And I think in role playing games, you guys know my opinion about like the restructuring of our goblinoid races in Dungeons and Dragons, and about their history of racial stereotypes, especially people, tribals, people, Africans and people of black and brown color that have been recontextualized as these monstrous races um, in explorative fiction, and how some people were just like, which is, I find this quite ironic in fantasy tabletop gaming, that people were like, don't mess with my goblinoids or something like that, like as if somehow their childhood would be destroyed by recontextualizing it. And I feel like there's no reason to rewrite history. I think we should keep the history the way it is and advance that history forward. Maybe in fantasy gaming, maybe the war between the elves and the dwarves and the orcs or something was simply misconceptions, and that, sure, there may have been people who were the chaotic evil because you looked them up in a monster manual, but they're not all like that. And so I like the idea that there were these things that were done that were wrong in the past, and that we're moving forward into a different area. And what a great way to embrace the hey, you don't know what our life has been like. We've had the goblinoids are like, we don't want to live in this monstrous realm with I don't know, krakens and hydras and harpies flying around and all this kind of stuff. You guys made us live in these places, so we've had to become brutal. And I think that would be kind of cool. But anyway, going back into talking about the Romani. In fiction, Romani are usually depicted as dishonest, thieves, pickpockets, con artists, trespassers, and tricksters who wouldn't think twice about taking everything you own that isn't nailed down, and a few things that are. The danger of children being kidnapped by Romani was a common old wives' tale. The stereotype for dishonesty may or not be where the term gyp probably comes from. In Europe, there are a number of Romani criminal organizations, both street gangs and mafias, but they're no more representative of all Romani than the mafia is of all Italians. Now, this is also like a chicken and an egg kind of thing, because you you don't know something about a group of people they're traveling past, you treat them bad, so they end up having to, in order to survive, they have to live on the bottom of the barrel, right? They're the lowest status individuals. They can't get, they are both disrespected socially, economically. They are not able to advance politically. They have no power. So of course they're going to engage in what you would consider criminal activities. And so it's like it's a chicken and an egg. Those people are criminals, and then they're like, yeah, because there's nothing else for us to be, because that's the only thing you'll allow us to have and to get. So we're going to have to take what we want. Now, I'm not saying that that's the case that they did, because it could be also a misrepresentation of nomadic cultures. Now, one of the things that I think in um, brings about the destruction of, when it comes to nomadic cultures and tropes and such, is a feudal society. So feudal society was often based on land and people. The more people you control, the more land you own, that was a measure of wealth. But in a nomadic culture, lots of things that we take for granted might end up being modified or even disappear. For example, the idea of ownership in a nomadic culture, or in a uh, settled society, me owning a hand axe belongs to me. But in a nomadic culture, maybe that hand axe belongs to everyone. Hey, I need to use that to cut the tree down. And it's like, well, you don't really need to ask permission. If you're going to go cut a tree down, just go grab the axe. You know what I mean? Or taken somewhere in the middle, maybe your belongings are only the thing that you can carry on your back and your mount. Right? Anything after that is considered probably useless and or even a detriment to survival if you have to get up and go. Um, One of the things I think that comes about, though, in uh, nomadic and even tribal societies that might be problematic somewhat in a role-playing game, is the idea of roles for the society, whether they are gender roles, based on gender, age, race, capability, or something. So, for example, um, the protection in when you have fewer resources for safety and getting yourself resources and things, food, water, shelter, and whatnot, it's necessary to keep your tribe and keep your organization moving and growing. And so therefore, women were often given, there were often gender specific roles, because you needed to keep the women safe, because they had to breed to take care of and raise and give birth to children. So you didn't want them out in the wild. Now, on the other hand, if the men were out there hunting or going to war or something, they had to be very capable of defending themselves as well. So both in history, we know that women were quite capable of fighting, but of course they were given the gender role of caretaking, while the guys who were pretty much disposable and, sorry, in many ways, were the labor use for a lot of those tribes. Now, of course, in fantasy gaming, we don't need to keep to those, or we can modify them greatly. Like, again, things could be divided by age. Things could be divided by capabilities, meaning like if you're the best warrior, then of course you're going to be doing warrior feats, as opposed to, say, the more intelligent one, um, intelligent individuals. Deadman says the app Perusa, a spelljammer race based heavily on the Romani, with many of their tropes, including the traveling caravans of ships. And that's in the Spelljammer. They didn't even bring up Spelljammer as something that's nomadic. Now, the the idea that there are one of the Romani stereotypes are these caravans that's kind of a combination of like trade and entertainment and palm reading and things like that. But if you think about it, in role playing games, if you follow, let's say we follow the tropes of all of the classic role playing classes, all of them kind of fit. They have a way of having a reason to want to become travelers. For example, like if we go with barbarian, right? Well, there's a reason that barbarians as a class, or as a, if we think of classes as less a profession but more of a motivation, of an inevitability, of a problem solving capability, then barbarians absolutely positively fit into a nomadic role, because hey, we don't have resources, and our resources are somewhere where we need to take it, we need to fight for it. And that fight might not be taking it from innocent people, it might be it could be larger forces somewhere else that are protecting resources, or dangerous beasts or animals that live around an oasis of safety and other resources like food or water. Bards, going back to what Deadman says about the Appaloosa uh, in Spelljammer, that was heavily based on Romani. Maybe bards are perfectly adapted for a nomadic culture, because we can go with the classic playing and singing of music as entertainers, and trading the ability to entertain for other resources such as information or food or shelter, or just a respite from heavy travel or something. But bards are actually far more than that as well, in the sense that bards are lore masters and such. And so the reason to travel is to gain more knowledge, or to be cartographers or something. Clerics and druids kind of flow together, because a religious pilgrimage, um, the spirits instructing one to travel, omens, portents of dangers to be had, the 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 idea of predicting the weather and moving to safe locations. Again, following the migration of birds, or herd animals, or aquatic animals, and things like that. Following nature, getting away from mudslides and forest fires and things of that nature. Now, that's more of a forced movement, but moving because in the expectation that something's going to happen. Like, hey, we need to move south because the winter snows are about to hit, and a desire to go someplace where there are greater resources. Or maybe it is, maybe a nomadic group is, they know that they're going to have births happening, and we need to be in a subtropical region, which might be a safer place than being in the harsh cold winters or something of that nature. So that might be another reason to keep traveling, to keep moving. Or if the nomadic group has been cyclical, there might be resources tucked away in a particular region, especially like someplace very harsh, like a harsh desert, or volcanic blasted land, or intensely winter region. And maybe traveling along, there are only so many resources. Maybe there's 2 weeks of resources in one place. We're going to travel so that we can go to another place that has another 2 weeks of resources that have been tucked away previous from either that nomadic group or some other nomadic groups as well. And I think one of the dangers of in role playing games is to assign very specific types of stereotypes to nomadic groups. Like, oh, um, nomadic elves are one way and nomadic orcs are another way, as opposed to separating the race, the heritage from the culture itself. So there could be various cultures. For example, they might be very extremely harsh or barbaric cultures out there, but they might not be assigned to a specific race or legacy of type of creature. It might just be, yeah, I'm going to call them um, the Black Ravens or something like that, right? And the Black Ravens are bestial. They might even be cannibalistic or something, but they might be made up of. And sure, they could be all be bugbears or orcs, but that might only be that specific group. Whereas there might be the river dwellers or something orc group that's like, we keep getting attacked by the Black Ravens. We're tired of it. Hey, can you help us out? And especially in a cyclical nomadic group, instead of the dungeon master having to come up with brand new locations and brand new NPCs and brand new groups every single time the players travel, they might be coming across the exact same groups, or similarly styled or cultural groups along a cyclical path. Hey, we're moving up to the north because it's getting very hot, and then we're going to cycle back down to the south when the winter storms come in. And so you could very well have a map, and you have nomadic groups, and then maybe half a dozen to a dozen specific locations that have some kind of a importance. Like, for example, we keep going down the path of the character classes for like druids, clerics, wizards, warlocks. There may be very important locations instead of the traditional wizard's tower or clerical church or something like that. Mosque, monastery. There may be outcroppings, specific locations based on both time and place, astrologically speaking, that grant characters the ability to commune or release their spirit or do a dream travel or something of that nature. And that may be the way that they grant their powers. Like, for example, cleric / druid might need to go to a certain mountain peak to commune with both earth and air spirits or something. Or the gods may say, on a particular time and day when the stars align, please go to this open glen, and you will find there a golden stream, which sip tastes like urine. The gods are like, zip, sure does. Drink your fill. No, but it may be some. Sorry, I just think of the golden spray. Anyway, it may be something of that nature, where instead of like the traditional ink and quill and big books or something, maybe wizards in this world are more shamanistic. Again, this is my only personal pet peeve. Like, we don't need a witch doctor, a separate shaman class and a separate witch doctor class and a separate class. It's just all of that. Hey, D's like, that's gross. Like, I don't know. Zeus might not think it's that. Listen, Zeus as a godling is pretty gross himself. I think him pissing in the mouths of mortals is the least of the nasty things Zeus has done. Oh my goodness. Hey, listen, what's the one-eyed orc god or goblinoid god, Grumsh? I wouldn't put it past Grumsh to be like, feed upon the golden shower, drink your fill, my followers. I'm sure there's at least one demonic, fiendish being in the 666 layers of the abyss that's just like, I'm gonna have me some fun. Zip. It's all lemonade and chocolate. Feast. And Dee's like, remind me not to accept potions from trickster gods. Am I supposed to drink this? The godling's like, yes, it will grant you great powers. Sure. Right. um, but again, I think the idea of traveling and being a nomad does not necessarily mean we have to change every aspect of the game. I think it's just a great way for us to recontextualize what the game is about, what kinds of things we can do in games, especially when moving away from reasons to move, like being forced, but having choices to go somewhere. Maybe there are absolutely okay. Let's go for some more Dungeons and Dragons classes and why they would want to travel. Of course, we have ourselves classic fighters and rangers. Fighters, of course, warrior class and whatnot. Anything from what kind of tropes are there? Anything from like gunfighters to to just going to war itself or protecting your own nomadic group. You're absolutely positively going to need fighters. Now, one switch on that, instead of just always going to war and fighting another group that comes along, is the idea of like challenges, duels. Two groups fighting each other. It might not be to the death, but there might be the warrior classes might challenge each other, so that because this might be an accepted form of conflict resolution so that neither nomadic group loses their best, most fierce warriors, because each group needs them to survive, right? Like, of course, there's going to be death and destruction. We're going to throw spears at each other and shoot each other with arrows and hack each other to death. But another way of conflict resolution might be like, hey, we're both going to attack that owl bear, and the first person to kill it is the dominant individual, right? Or and we both get to eat, and we get to figure out who's the most powerful, who's the dominant force in this group. It might be transversing a certain location, climbing the highest tree or peak, swimming across dangerous rivers or things of that nature. So the more physically able, heck, just plain old arm wrestling or wrestling in general, or punching each other in the throat or something like that might be some kind of conflict resolution as well. Also, just nomadic groups meeting up together and defending each other from other beasts that are out there might be a very cultural thing. And we know a classic stereotype amongst a lot of nomadic cultures are the idea of the unbroken oath of acceptance, right? So I'm thinking more the stereotype of like Bedouin tribes that are like, you know what, we hate each other, but I'm going to offer you neither one of us wants to suffer out here in the vast desert. So I'm going to offer you a safe place, 3 days of safety, and we're going to share chai or tea or something like that, and or hookah or whatever. And the other group is like, yeah, I don't like you either, but thanks for protecting me. And no, I'm not going to backstab you or attack you or anything, at least after a minimum of 3 days or whatever the case might be. So there might be these ways to interact with groups, warrior groups, where they come across each other and they engage in things that might be less lethal, or at least less lethal for large groups of people. It's like, listen, we're 5 warriors, you got 5 warriors. Leave our people alone, but us 5, we can all fight together if we need to settle this out. And they're like, yeah, okay, crack knuckles, throw spear, javelin, or whatever. Um, Especially for rangers, rangers are absolutely set to both be nomadic and cyclical, whether they are hunters, traders, trappers, stalkers, monster hunters, or something, undead going on, undead plagues and things like that with zombies and skeletons roaming around and having to slaughter them because they're spreading around the world. There might be the 17-year cicadas that are coming up. There might be these like D mentioned the other day about like every 1,000 years a particular monster comes up and starts running around. Those 15th level plus characters going out to kill the Tarrasque because Tarrasques are like cicadas writ large as kaiju or something. There's a reason to go hunt them down, and hunting them down might be the like they're not awake yet. Maybe they're just eggs or hibernating or something like that. And so rangers absolutely positively fit into a nomadic culture to say like, listen, I can't stick at home. I got to go out there, and me and my group need to roam the countryside to find a thing. Yeah, Deadman says that's been the point of several movies. The the we need to go out and get the thing and stop the zombies or the incursion or whatever it is to destroy the thing before the thing gets worse. Which perfectly makes sense, right? Like player characters going out to kill half a dozen to multiples of dozens of undead makes perfect sense, especially if they are spreading or breeding, or a mistake has been made, like the classic origin of a lot of Dungeons and Dragons monsters, where like everything from chimera to owl bears and so on, gelatinous cubes were accidentally created in a wizard's alchemical lab or something and are starting to spread. That may be a thing as well. Rangers also don't necessarily, while they are technically hunters and monster slayers now, they could also be like monster corrallers, like scouts, like, oh, they are migrating to the northeast, therefore we don't need to go that direction. Or we're keeping track of the herd of 500,000 bison or something like that. We know exactly where they're going, or they're not going to their normal watering source, they're going to the east. maybe we should follow them because the water sources are drying up. So there's a great reason for rangers to be out there moving around and such. Now, for the other classes like wizards, sorcerers, um, uh, recontextualizing what wizardry is a good thing. Now, for sorcerers in bloodlines, it might be searching for other people who are in the same bloodline. It might be searching for origins, especially if your sorcerers have been like infected or abducted or charmed or influenced by some like astrological effect or chaos storms or something like that. Um, it absolutely fits in. And Dante says some sorcerer archetype characters would probably be nomadic to avoid prejudice. Absolutely. And that here we go. That's thank you for bringing it back around in a circle for talking about the Romani and nomadic people. The whatever racial heritage types in your world that have prejudice, orcs, dragonborn, drow elves, dark elves, or something like that. Lots of there are lots of reasons for things in the Dungeons and Dragons fantasy world for people to travel to avoid prejudice of many types. Or maybe just they're just connected to whatever events caused people to be nomadic in the first place. Um, you know, dragons devastating the landscape might not make people want to be nice to Dragonborn, right? Um, Despite the fact that they don't have anything to do with it, we already know today that people have violence against peoples that are tangentially associated with world events. Yeah, I'm looking at you, people who are unreasonably violent and prejudiced against uh, Asians and Asian Americans and in general, which anyway, I got on my soapbox before. I'm not going to get on it again. But you get my point. It would be very easy to blame Dragonborn for all the damage that dragons have been doing, or at least one dragon has been doing to a countryside to get people to have to leave their homes. Now, um, another thing might just be prophecy in general. A warlock told to go on a journey to go somewhere. Why? Because the warlock patrons, because I told you so. Don't backtalk me. Smack, smack in the back of your spiritual head or something. I mean, warlocks have all kinds of reasons to leave their homes to do a thing. Paladins, I skipped paladins. Paladins fall into the same journey. Hell, a paladin might be going on a travel of atonement for the rest of their life. Curses are another thing. What's the Odysseus and what is Jason and the Argonauts and Odysseus? They literally an adventure that took forever. Odysseus leaves for 15 years. They're like, damn it, I can't get back home because Neptune's being an ass, right? I can't. And so traveling on the high seas or across vast deserts or being told to being exiled or something of that nature. Even technically, if you're a Game of Thrones fan, the the destruction of Volantis and what's the family name? The Targaryens left their home to come someplace else. Now, of course, they settled down and dominated everyone with the threat of dragons. Well, not just the threat, the threat and application of dragons, but again, their culture was destroyed and it that kind of thing. So yeah, absolutely. Mike Gould mentions that taking a note from the world of darkness, there's a werewolf tribe that must wander as the ghosts of their past victims are always in pursuit. Ooh, yep. Fleeing your own guilt or ravages or literally the punishment. What is it? The sins of the father will fall upon the sons. It's the kind of thing where maybe there's a group of people who are living trying to make amends for something that has been done in the past by their own peoples. Heck, just being chased by something harsh and dangerous and ephemeral is a reason to have to keep moving. Also, let's be honest. In our own world, there are people who just want to move. circling back to the Romani, that's their culture. There's a reason why we don't want to sit still, because we see what happens when people settle. And um, so the reason for settling is, it might be culturally an antithesis to why people want to move, right? Hey, you know what happens when you settle? You guys start infighting, and there's backstabbing, and there's lying and stealing and theft and all kinds of stuff. And we're not about that. We are a nomadic group that wants to challenge ourselves and grow our people and teach our young ones to survive and pass on our legacies and things like that. And civilized society just can't work in this concept. And also, nomadic peoples do throw monkey wrenches into settled society political systems, right? A nomadic culture might be very egalitarian. Hey, we share in everything, we work together, and that doesn't work when you're in the midst of trying to be better than other people. And when you start telling them, like, when you're a king or a duke or something, and you're like, you're going to be on my land, I'm going to tell you what to do, and the people are like, well, I'm getting the hell out of here. Then I don't have to listen to you. Deadman says the movie D&D, The Tome of Ultimate Evil, was about a paladin in training that was forced into a nomadic life and teaming up with evil characters. That's another. Nomadic travel is a great panacea for why characters of diverse backgrounds would want to work together. So an example would be the paladin working with the assassin, and the paladin not, going along with poisoning people and cutting people's throats and backstabbing them, might need to work with this character because of what they do, but then the evil assassin might be learning from it. Because listen, a lot of times when we see intellectual properties that are based around like post-apocalyptic settings, usually it's not just the external, like Mad Max or zombie apocalypse, but it's the collapse of civilization. And how do people reorganize themselves with the collapse of civilization? Do they work together? Do they become egalitarian? Do they share everything? Do they become communal? Do they put themselves into a very strict hierarchy of like who's in charge and who must obey, or do they become bestial and cannibalistic and evil and backstab each other? How much of their humanity do they lose? And so, of course, that's always a thing. Mike Gould says, look at the clone spell, for instance. A player might be an underpowered or flawed clone being hunted by their more powerful original, unless you keep thinking you're the original and you're actually the clone. Since I'm late to the talk, perhaps this has been raised. Are the elves of Dragon Age nomadic? That I don't know. I'm not very familiar with Dragon Age, and it does bring up it. This does bring up a question as to what things very easily fit into and do not fit into um, constant exploration, right? Like dwarves, maybe gnomes, halflings, orcs. We can think of them as like, oh, let's pack up and go, no big deal. But even dragonborn, maybe. But elves kind of don't fit in there. Asimar, things of that nature. Like maybe just, and this is just me instantly thinking off the top of my head, they may not seem to fit into that realm, but I think it makes perfect sense for all of those aspects of Dungeons and Dragons to fit into it. Well, now, mind you, there might be creatures, animals, magics, um, races that might not be very nomadic in a world where you have to be, especially when you start talking about stasis and hibernation and such. Like elves might be awake at a particular period of time, whether it's seasonal or something, and then they might go into a hibernation state of sorts. And that hibernating state might be something that happens like, over a winter season or 6 months out of the year or something like that, only to reawaken to come back into the world. That might be a possibility as well. The Khajiit and Elder Scrolls are nomadic, and Redguard tend to be too. Thank you there, D. Not real familiar with them. Now, again, our definition of nomadic might be we might be splitting hairs with this. I mean, like, are you nomadic if you only travel within 100 miles of where you normally live, or is it 500 miles? Is it 1,000? Do you have to go around the world, or can you just go? Can you just walk north and south, like up the Appalachian, up and down the Appalachian Trail, or something like the? Um, is it constantly going to new places, or are you following a migration? Are you traveling in, like, again, a cyclical manner? Are you going in a circle, or are you weaving around things? So I think what we our definition of what nomadic is does not necessarily need to be in concrete, but it could be like, oh, the elves always have lived in the woods, even though they keep moving from area to area within the dark woods, whereas the gnomes in their, I don't know, giant machines or something keeps rolling around the world and they never stay in the same place twice, right? Um, Yeah, Mike Gould mentions consider subterranean nomads as well. Nomadic clans of gnomes or dwarves that follow purple worms to find new ores. The worms never stop, so the people cannot either. Exactly. And they might just be, again, like finding ore and aquifers and things like that. Maybe the dwarves and gnomes are constantly following the tunnels of the purple worms or something. Maybe those tunnels collapse after a particular period of time, and they just follow the purple worms. Keeping at a specific distance so they're not attacked, but at the same time they're following along, like following giant worms. I would love to. I think that makes perfect sense. um, Maybe the purple worms keep the land sharks, the boulets, at a distance because they're scared of them, and so they have to follow the purple worms. But they also can't, like, they can't just ride the purple worms like the sandworms in Dune, or maybe there are warriors that are able to do that. Um, Also, maybe the gnomes have like machines that they have to upkeep. So on one hand, they get to travel away from the great places where there's lots of ore to find other resources, but they have to come back because they have to smelt those things to keep the gears running. I don't know. Any number of things like that would be possible. And of course, you have yourselves elemental travel as well. So there might be like elemental apertures or something that certain races are able to use. Like, hey, we can dive down into the elemental, skirt along the outskirts of the elemental plane of Earth to come back up into another region on the prime material plane. Same thing with aerial travel as well, following migratory birds or clouds, or getting away from hurricane and tornado season or something like that. Yeah. Mike says, and they can't stop for long behind the purple worms, as there's always a risk that the worm could loop back. Yep. Yep. And the worms might not even care that there's like dwarves behind them or around them or something. It might just be vibration. Like, I need something to eat. What's that? What's that behind me? Loop, loop, loop. Right. Also, who's to say that the dwarves aren't a clan who are trying to lead the purple worms in a particular direction? Force multipliers, right? Hey, there's great swaths of mithril steel somewhere that we can smelt into something. We need to get the purple worms to move to that region. Hey, let's move ahead of the purple worms, or perform some kind of action that causes the purple worms to dig in and around a particular region, and they have to keep traveling to keep the purple worms moving so that the people they've left behind aren't in danger. It's the Mad Max driving the big giant truck filled with sand. Sorry, spoiler alert, to keep the bad guys away from where the true group has filled up their school buses with, crude oil, whatnot. I like the idea as well of caring for a group. Um, Now there are various ways to do this. I'm going to bring up Blades in the Dark like I always do. Blades in the Dark has a separate. Blades in the Dark is a neo Victorian role playing game, and so the characters are all criminals, but there is a character sheet, a group character sheet that is a gang, and you get to make up your own gang. And I would love, matter when I say love, it's like I'm gonna try to heavily reinforce this for the guys over at N World for the project, but um, I'm definitely going to. I like the idea of like a group caring for a tribe of some sort, and the player characters can use the tribe both as a resource, but it's also something they need to protect. So yeah, my character can create food and water, but we need more food and clean water sources and shelter for the people we're protecting. And why are we protecting them? Maybe they offer some sort of like, um, I don't know, for example, uh, taking a short or long rest away from the group might take longer, or might not have as great ability for the characters to recover, but when they go back with the main tribe, they're able to recover greatly, or the tribe is able to carry things that the player characters themselves cannot carry. Or maybe they offer other force multiplying, right? Maybe the nomadic group the player characters are traveling with is able to perform a thing that the 5-man group can't do on their own. And lastly, it's a great place to put some NPCs, some replacement player characters, and other things of that nature as well. Mike Gould says there may well be dwarves ahead of the worms who set charges to lure the worms. Yep. Sounds, vibrations, chanting, all that kind of stuff. Yep. Absolutely. Says Mike Gould, it's the parental outlook. You have to consider future supplies for more than yourself. Exactly. And even um, maybe you could tie it. I mean, mechanically, there are various ways you can tie it to the player characters without necessarily punishing them. But I think it would be a great idea to do it where, you know what, you want to recover those spell slots or something, you're going to have to go back to your nomadic group, or you all those extra magic items you wanted to attune to. Yeah, you're not carrying them on yourself, but your group sure is. Or I don't know. There's other ways to do it. I'm just grabbing things out of my ass, but I guarantee there are better ways and other ways to incorporate like the parental outlook that Mike Gould's mentioning. Like, yeah, it's not just you. It's not always about you. It's about these other people. Um, Rickard mentions like, so why are the people nomadic? Why haven't they settled down? Well, we mentioned that quite a bit, but the first thing is they don't want to. Like we mentioned up above, the Romani people, because that's their culture, right? That's an easy. It's the Stan Lee. Why do mutants exist? Because they do, right? Where do your superpowers come from? Instead of coming up with a new origin because you were born with it, right? It's the culture. They want to. But yesterday we talked about a lot of outside sources, danger, all kinds of danger, elemental dangers, dangers from magic, dangers from monsters, dangers from the environment. Maybe there's a reason, escaping a plague or zombies or hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes. That's the external thing. Hey, we got to keep moving because of the thing. um, uh, we mentioned today prejudice. You got to keep moving because people don't like you. You have to keep moving because food and water and shelter sources are very low. You have to keep moving because of temperature variations or air and storms and things. But in internally, we talked about a lot of the character classes, like why would you want to move? Because the gods told me to. I need to go on a pilgrimage. I need to atone. Yeah. Michael says it could be cultural. The perceptions of other cultures, the need for resources, the need to escape a persistent force. I can't read the rest of it. Or foe. That is the thing. The need to escape a persistent force or foe, and it could just be cultural. It is a, you know what, coming of age. I'm traveling. I'm doing a walkabout. I'm traveling. I'm doing Iditarod because I can, because nobody else can, or something like that. Rickard even mentions dangers from monsters. Isn't that why people would build camps with palisades? I think you're trying. Uh, I, we need a voice of dissension, but I think you also, not you, but for people who don't understand why people would want to move, there is the idea that we are trying to force a way of thinking because we're used to the way of thinking, right? We're the majority of the earth is a settled culture, but that's not the norm, right? Bringing up the Romani, there's they estimate between 7 to 14 million nomadic peoples. Well, there's a reason why that many people are on the move. Now it could be external, again, prejudice, lack of resources, but there's also the idea that let's go back to my word egalitarian, a culture that doesn't want to put themselves into a structure, or a culture that doesn't want to settle, and a culture that doesn't believe in the ownership of property or something like that, doesn't that's their culture. They don't feel that there's a need to belong to a larger, greater society that's settled down, right? If everyone shares in everything and there's 30 people and they're like, you know what, we hunt together, we share, we live together, we sing songs, we raise all of our kids together. If we settle down in this region, we're going to be forced to accept their job offers and accept the way they live and accept their monetary exchanges and accept it. And a lot of people will say, hell with that, right? So I think it's just a matter of unre- releasing the shackles of what we know. And I'm not blaming you. I'm just saying, like, yeah, there's a lot of reasons to settle down, but there's also reasons to keep moving. And I think embracing that in a nomadic culture, I think is awesome, because then it forces us. I think the creativity part of it is to force us to think outside the box of, well, why would people not want to settle down and get together? For example, maybe there are so many. If I'm a monster and I want to eat things, I would rather go after the larger group than the smaller group, right? The more mobile group or something like that. You know, I if it's like potato chips. I can't just eat one. You know, Michael's making the argument like, hey, some foes require more than a palisade. Boulets and other burrowing monsters could care less. Also mentioning that, I hope Ricker's setting up the other side, but Michael says water may be scarce, so you're constantly on the move to find new sources for a large group. And also things like disease spreads in large groups. Food sources are harder to spread around in large groups and things like that as well. So yeah, the Athasian elves of Dark Sun were migratory. So were the halflings in Eberron, and I think the halflings are nomadic in well, Dark Sun is a perfect example of a nomadic world where there are oases ruled by the dragon lords, where you can live under slavery, or you could say F that and then keep walking around, right? Ricker says, if most people and cultures settled, it would be the norm. If you make a culture that goes against the norm, or a world where you've changed the norm, you should think more about it then, because and of course, um, the idea that it depends on what the norm is, right? In our world, settling is a norm, but we still have migratory people. Now, why are they migratory? Some of it is just plain old culture. We've always traveled. The other part is the concept of cultural ownership, right? Like Michael says, most indigenous peoples were at least somewhat nomadic. It had everything to do with resources, and it's like, oh, there's 1.5 million bison. Maybe we can just follow them because we have resources. They are naturally uh, designed to find water sources and shelter and get away from weather. Maybe we should just follow them. Or the other part is, maybe we should collect them together and live in one normal area. And again, what do we define as nomadic? Is nomadicy? Nomadicisms, is being nomadic, traveling a few miles, hundreds of kilometers, thousands, cyclical? Is it north south? Is it east west? Is it moving around your own desert or your own forest or your own jungle, or is it required to go over mountain ranges and jungles and the sea, and like that? That's also has an important part of it. Has a lot to do with it too, and a lot of being nomadic involves the idea of, for us as a modern culture, involves us like we are attached to our industry, right? So for example, in Dungeons and Dragons, classes like artificers and wizards and things of that nature, even some of the 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 Warforged and Gearforged are created by industry and trade and monetary values. But if we release our hold on that, maybe there's a possibility that nomadic cultures don't want those things or don't have a need for them, and still are able to, you know, to I don't want to say survive, but to adapt to the region in which they are. And again, what if we're talking about fantasy? So maybe having enough failures and settling is going to get people to keep moving, right? Enough cities destroyed by monsters that can smell all the humanity gathered together, or the dragons that are flying overhead and blasting these major cities to get the resources they want, or create enough fantastical wars to get people to go, I'm not going to collect with you guys, or enough disease and you're going to get people to keep on moving. So outside outside reasons to be motivated to move is a thing. And what if the world itself, we brought up before, the world's like Mercury, where the sun side is blasted with heat, and the dark side is blasted with cold, frozen with cold, and there's this band in the world that keeps moving, then you're going to have to move, or hibernate, or go underground, or airships and piracy is another way of nomadic travel, where you're on the high seas or you're in the air or something like that. Michael says Thol, who's Michael's home setting, has nomadic doppelgangers, formerly spies and assassins for an empire. They are now very much like the Romani. They stay on the move to keep the secret of their nature. And that's another thing too in fantasy that we tend to ignore, that that other there are other things in the world other than humanity, and they too might be on the move. Like, doppelgangers aren't just chaotic evil things that are in the book. They're like, I don't want to get killed. I'm gonna keep moving, because if we stay too close too long somewhere, they're going to realize that I'm a replacement, a body snatcher, a thing that's living in this place. Vampires are a thing that are excellent in settled areas, and people might not want to be killed by vampires, or have their blood sucked or something. And they're like, if we stay in the city and we keep collecting in cities, vampires love humanity in big cities. And in a small groups of several dozen to a few hundred, you might be able to very easily find, what is the card game, werewolf, or something like that. Like, it might be very easy to find the lycanthrope, or the doppelganger, or the person who is sick in a small group than whatnot. Yeah, Michael says most indigenous peoples were at least somewhat nomadic. Oh, I'm sorry, other one. Staying still is a very imperial or European outlook. Absolutely, and for good reason, right? If you don't have resources, you're going to want to keep and get those resources and keep them together in one place. Yeah, Rickard's like, we doing the whole week with nomadic cultures? We sure are. Influenced primarily by the recent release of a movie known as Nomadland, but it made me think of it. It brought up other things like the Romani and exploration and moving and travel and things like that, where we are embracing nomadic cultures in our role playing games, and why would we want to? And how can we make that really cool? Yep. Oh, look at Near Dark, a small group of nomadic vampires. Yeah. 30 Days of Night. Yeah. Yeah. Rickard says every single part of the world had staying still. It's from a European outlook. Oh, absolutely. Well, every part of the world has stable regions, but that's not to say that. But every part of the world had nomads. I mean, it's kind of like, yeah, but every part of the world had nomads until they learned to settle down, right? Um, and it depends on, again, in a fantasy world. Yeah, yeah. The idea of land ownership and um, keeping resources close to you and keeping them uh, organizing the resources amongst the people and keeping those resources safe is a thing. But if those resources are constantly on the move or you're unable to keep them close, you're going to have to move. And so these are reasons why we would or embrace the idea of being a nomadic, because safe city states or something like that. Yep. 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 You see, yeah, there we go. Yep. I just went to the same thing. Like Rickard says, city states would also be staying still, not just imperial. But again, it assumes city states are safe, right? Staying still is a matter of safety and resources. In a world where you can't stay safe, here we go. You guys arguing. City states again are a Euro concept. Yeah. Um, I would argue it's not, well, um if we're being vague enough, like the Central South American, like the Aztec culture, I guess would be considered a version of a city state. But I think getting away from the city state, I think the idea that the the idea of like Rickard said again, not just European, is this idea that most of us consider stability in our modern culture to be the epitome. Yeah, yep, exactly. Dante says sea states existed in Asia. One of the difficult things, though, in terms of keeping power, is the ability that you can't. Yeah, yeah. Rickard's like, yeah, I'll save it for tomorrow if we're doing world building. Yeah, see, because here's the thing: we're all assuming the reason why people collect together and stay still is that resources are a commonality, right? Hey, we can keep food and water and shelter in one place. It's very difficult to pick that stuff up and move, because every time you move, there is this idea that everything is on the move. Um, and when people settle, there's a predictability with it, right? Like Dead Man saying, Japan started out as several city states that ended up uniting under one emperor. And when it comes to that, that also lends itself to the stability lends itself to a political system that we're used to. That, hey, if I leave the stability, there is an unknown out there. But why? But just because something is a way doesn't mean it has to be that way. Again, we are ignoring the fact that there are 7 to 14 million people who are on the move. And so just because there is something, just because the majority of the world, just because there's billions of people who have technologically advanced to a certain level, doesn't mean, remember, our play region, we don't play Dungeons and Dragons to advance technology to the 1920s, right? What happens is we are playing Dungeons and Dragons to adventure. It's not a historical game, nor is it a this is what the prediction of the future is. It's basically like, it's what if, what if dragons existed? Well, maybe big giant city states wouldn't be a thing, or maybe they wouldn't exist in the way that we think they would, right? um Rickard's doing the historical, like, staying still has far more to do with less effort, more reward for the tribe than everything else, and that happened everywhere in the world. Yes, everything, humanity loves less effort, more reward, right? And you're going to try to find those things. And remember, being nomadic doesn't mean you're moving every day. There are lots of people, like indigenous peoples, who okay. Here are we going with semantics. Um, Settling down can be very regional and seasonal. So, for example, spring and summer, people may settle down for 3 months. Well, technically, that's settling down with members of the group ranging out of their group to do a thing to come back to then 3 or 4 months later pick up and move and then settle again. So, the definition of that as humanity advanced, we would do that. But remember, we don't play when we're playing our game, we're not playing 500 years of role playing. What we're doing is we're playing in that moment. It's the idea of like firearms, right? People are like, well, firearms got rid of swords and armor. Yes, but not instantly, right? Yeah, not just humanity, animals in general like less effort, more reward. Yeah, you're right. But like the cheetah likes to burn the cheetah, which burns a lot of energy chasing things down pretty damn quick, right? For the most part, what do they do? Sleep most of the day and lounge in shade. But they also roam because they got to go after their food. So, well, at least predators do. Well, no, birds migrate all the time. Not that they want to, but they do. Yep. Um, Staying still is tied to agriculture. A culture without farming will never settle. Historical fact. I'm not going to argue the histories because you're always going to find the exceptions. Again, can I point out a very large exception? The Romani people in modern day estimated 7 to 14 million people on the move and still moving. My point being is that you creativity and expression of of um, of fantasy is not good if it's going to be narrowed down to like, oh well, here's the lowest common denominator of what people would do, so then that's what we do. um, because people don't do that. There are always people who are the exception. For every for every family member that's like, why do we have a roamer in our family who never settles down? Tell that to them. Yeah, Dead Man says just be careful. Too much less effort results in rat deaths en masse. It's been proven scientifically. Yeah, and like D says, our historical fact has little bearing on a fantasy fiction. Exactly. A lot of our cities would look a whole hell of a lot different if dragons existed, right? Sure, we have history to result on. We don't have clerics and demons and extra planar creatures and things of that nature. And how do I say this? I think we're too it's too easy for us to sit on one side of the equation, right? Because if we do the well history says, then we might as well not even have fantasy in the first place, right? It's the idea that like why would Spelljammer exist or Dark Sun exist or Ravenloft exist? Well, it's because someone said, how about we create a world where there's been devastation by magic and all life is gone? Okay, so that's the one side of the equation. And then what we do is we build, well, here's the reason why. Yeah. Yeah. I hear you, Rickard, and I think you're arguing the idea of why people would settle down. My point is yes, but this is a world where you can't do that, right? It's like saying it's kind of like saying, well, if there weren't zombies, people wouldn't be hunting zombies. Therefore, it doesn't make any sense for people to run away from zombies, right? Yeah. Yeah. Dante says, come to think of it, a world with dragons would have better roofs and fewer walls. Maybe. Yeah. All fireproofed and made out of asbestos. Hells yes. Not just dragons too. Remember, there's a whole hell of a lot of other stuff out there. Although magic would make things pretty easy to settle down, to be honest with you. But it depends on, if the gods went to battle and the magic ripped the world and storms were everywhere. Like you could kind of make up an excuse for anything. If you're already looking for the if you're already looking for the answer you want, it's easy to find it by coming up with examples to make it so. You know, right? Dragons would literally create nomadic cultures. They would claim so many resources and create a danger to settling in their territory. Ricker says, my point, which I will be more on about tomorrow, world building, is that if you world build something, think it through and make sure it works so that it makes sense in the world at hand. I've been trying to do that. And you're shooting down every reason for why people are on the move. Just saying because they don't settle is a super lazy way to world build. I haven't been saying that. I've been saying that resources aren't available, that people can't collect together, that it's dangerous. Yeah. Dragons would force every culture underground. Yeah, I think so. There would be a lot of that on the ground under move. Yeah. Michael's like, so are having all dwarves drink and all elves shoot bows, but there you go. Yeah, same thing there, right? Like it's like, yeah, it doesn't make sense. It's just that the idea here is nomadic cultures had a reason to be nomadic, and it's because they needed their resources in the move. But it's also, again, we were talking about the fact that external reasons, which I'm okay. Just speaking, records is like not saying you haven't, just speaking generally. No, I laid out yesterday in the day like the whole idea that there are elemental dangers, weather systems, there are biological dangers, food sources, there are migratory dangers. Our food source keeps moving. There are population dangers. We can't feed everyone who's always together. There are fantastical reasons. The god told you to move. The my warlock patron said to go here. My paladin has to go on atonement. My we are searching for a particular region to try to settle in. Mad Max was all about trying to find the paradise, right? So we're playing. Remember, getting to the end of something is always a thing, but playing in the middle is a thing, right? Piracy. We're on the open seas because we are trying to gather resources. The expeditions, when Europe sent all their expeditions around the world, they were being nomadic in many ways. Hey, let's leave home. We have to go somewhere else. Australia was settled in many ways that way. Yep. Yeah, preserving food and water. When you have magic like preserved food, I don't think you need as much farming to settle down. Just think out loud, right? Good berry, preserve food, create food and water. You can pretty much live anywhere. What is it? Leomund's tiny hut, or the tiny hut spell. I think they took the Leomund out of there. Same thing with Tensor, but like things like that. Then that makes nomadic living very easy. Also, again, we're talking about population centers. Maybe those population centers are dangerous for things that like to eat people. And also, culturally speaking, the reason why a lot of Romani today are nomadic is because of a cultural imperative. Our people always traveled. We're going to travel with our people. So, yeah, yeah. Sadly, Rickard sadly couldn't make yesterday, so I was asking why people were moving in the case of the discussion. Yep. Oh, yep. Drying, salting foods. Yep. Just the concept of being able to dry or salt foods makes travel a lot easier. What is it? Drying, salting, smoking foods and whatnot. And also, it depends on the time period, right? Like if we're talking of very technologically advanced cultures, they're settled. We don't have to play in a world where that's the case. Or um, space whales, yeah. Tomorrow we got to hit on an interplanar and interplanet migration, space whales. We're going to talk about that on Future Friday, but yeah. So there's all kinds of reasons why people are on the move, and again, being whether it's a cyclical nature or something. Okay. let's how about nuclear war, right? That a nuke After a nuclear war or an atomic blast or something like that, people will be on the move. Does that mean forever and always every culture forever and ever won't settle down? Of course not. It means that you're playing in the realm of here's what happened, here's why people are on the move. And so, sure, given enough time, you can see people settling down, but not right now, right? Firearms took over, medieval combat. Of course it did, but not right now, you know? So, yeah. Ricker says also the God tells you to never settle is one hell of a mystery box. Yeah, the gods told you not to settle. The spirits told you to keep moving. The purple worms keep attacking our village. The um the our resource keeps moving away from us, and it's very difficult to keep that resource still or something like that. So there's lots of reasons why people want to be on the move, and I think given the opportunity, while people don't want to, the United States was settled by nomads in very many ways, right? Gold rush, oil, railroads, the migration of the bison, lots of that. Eventually, the United States got settled, but the Americas all nomadic. And remember, they were being nomadic to find a place to settle down, right? But in the middle, they were like, "What? Yeah." Lastly, Rickard says, Why did you say that? What happens if they do settle? How does the nomad tribes handle if someone in the tribe wants to settle somewhere?" See, that's where that's you almost don't want to answer that, right? Or you want the answer to come in the gameplay. I guarantee you, nomadic peoples always wanted to settle. Lost you on Discord. Ooh, shit. I accidentally closed it out. Sorry. Because we're coming to the end. I gotta go. But yeah, answering that question, I think, is probably an in-game world kind of thing. I guarantee you, every nomadic culture has had their people going like, why don't we keep moving? Shit, we could settle right now and keep the horses and bison and chickens and water and create agriculture and settle down. And I guarantee you that's probably happened in game. That probably happens a lot. Maybe there's a dichotomy between we don't like you because you settled down versus we want you to stay with us, but then we're going to keep moving, but then you settled down and maybe we should settle and stuff like that. And like Rickard says, oh, for sure, you want it to be a mystery. Oh yeah, hell yeah, and more, right? Maybe the people settled down. Maybe they are thriving, or maybe the nomadic people come back and go, listen, get your stuff. You got to move. There's a hurricane coming. There's dragons coming. And they're like, nah, we settled down. Forget it. Forget about it. They're like, no, please get your stuff. We got to go. You know, I'm sure that kind of thing has happened more than a little bit. Including with the Romani people. I guarantee you there are people who keep flowing in and out of the Romani people that are like, no, we're just going to settle down. And others are like, no, we're going to keep the hell on moving because we're treated so bad every time we settle down. They're arresting us and throwing bricks through our windows. F that. Let's keep moving. Yep. I mentioned the exact same thing I was saying. Like, you might have other cultures that get skittish when the nomad people put up camp close because they don't know what the gods think about their temporary camps. Yep, absolutely. Not, and just people in general too. Or the how many times have the orcs set up camp outside of some rando farm, right? It's That's a thing. Even if they aren't dangerous, people were like, why are the orcs setting here? So anyway, guys, got to get out of here. Got to head off to work. It went a little too long with this one. So I will see thee later. Peace.